The White Witch of Spiton and the Serpent of Anata. Chapter 6. The Wigget and the Pilot. Angus snoozed peacefully on his soft tartan cushion. He was pleased that he no longer had to spend his time with a large drooling dog and an arrogant spoilt cat. He'd thankfully returned to being lord and master of his familiar surroundings. And what fine surroundings they were. A grand house set in 100 acres of heather-kissed rolling hills, inherited by Bertha's deceased husband from his ancestors before him. Hennessy House was 300 years old, a building that held a proud place in Scottish history books. Lady Ludroth and Isabel had arrived earlier that evening. Diana had been coerced into letting Isabel come and had been reassured that her daughter's surprise holiday would greatly benefit her history education, keep her out of trouble and stop her from being bored during the long summer break. Lady Ludroth had seriously considered using her magic levator boots, but due to the large quantity of personal belongings and heavy suitcases, decided to travel with Isabel by train. But then any kind of transport was much more appealing than travelling in her sister's sidecar. They all sat close around the crackling fire, Lady Ludroth sipping a small glass of sweet sherry, a black crocheted shawl covering her bony, pointed shoulders. Isabel gazed around the dimly lit yet cosy room. The cold wind outside hauntedly rattled the leaded windows, and Isabel felt the remoteness and isolation of the place. Although she adored the peaceful countryside, the thought of living on her own in such a vast house as Bertha did sent a cold chill down her spine. But Bertha seemed happy enough on her own, without even the service or daily company of a living housekeeper. Lady Ludroth didn't have a loving companion either, but at least she had Edith to keep her company in Moon Manor. "I don't know why you choose to stay all alone in this very large and frightfully cold house," said Lady Ludroth. "Why don't you employ a housekeeper, dear?" Bertha had just staggered in, carrying a large pile of chopped logs. Throwing 4 of them onto the dwindling fire, she took a poker from its wrought iron holder and stoked the flames. "Oh, I couldn't stand someone fussing around me all day, Lucinda," replied Bertha. "I'm quite capable of looking after myself. I've managed all these years and I'm still fit and well." "You know," said Lady Ludroth, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, "you're welcome to come and live with me in Moon Manor." Bertha let out raucous laughter. "We're both too long in the tooth and too set in our ways, Lucinda. We'd drive each other bonkers. Besides, my little Angus would miss his home. But thanks for the kind offer, pet." A gold-framed oil painting of a rugged, bearded gentleman dominated one of the walls. He was smartly dressed in a tartan kilt and looked proud and strong. Isabel could not help but stare at so distinguished-looking a man. Bertha became aware of Isabel's admiring gaze. "That's my Hamish," she said, "my wonderful husband. He hated every minute of posing for that portrait. That's the longest time I've ever known him to stand in one place. He was so active and had ants in his pants." "You must miss him terribly," said Isabel compassionately. "I do," said Bertha, "but I feel his presence quite often, and I sometimes catch a whiff of his cigar." Bertha's tearful eyes twinkled brightly as she reminisced about happier days with Hamish. "Now," she said, looking around the room, "where did I put Harold's papers?" She walked towards the writing bureau and inside found a tatty old cigar box. "Here it is." She rested the box on her lap, opened the lid and took out the contents. "There are photos of Harold's evacuations in Egypt and the people that he met along the way." Lady Ludroth studied the photos closely and then passed one after the other to Isabel. The ancient pyramids were captivating and beautiful. "Who's this young boy standing next to Harold?" asked Lady Ludroth, frowning. He looks like one of the natives. What a sweet boy. Let me see, said Bertha. That's Niger Nugan. Harold met him during an expedition to Egypt. Apparently he was a water carrier for the diggers. I doubt very much if he's still alive. Bertha picked up a stained brown envelope and read the enclosed letter. Here's a letter to Harold from Nadja. And this appears to be a return address. Let me take a look, said Lady Ludroth, reading it. He thanks Harold for helping him with a large sum of money. This allowed him to open a tourist gift shop in the city of Cairo. How very generous of our dear grandfather. She continued deciphering the letter. It's a little jumbled. Perhaps his English wasn't that good. He's written, "Don't worry about the amphibian." What on earth does he mean? Perhaps Nadja was an animal activist, said Bertha, looking perplexed. Suddenly there was a loud crack from the fire. The flames suddenly rose higher and danced and swayed. The portrait of Hamish abruptly dropped down off the wall and then leaned to one side as though he wanted to make his presence felt. "Oh, I dinna like it when that happens," said Bertha uneasily. "My Hamish isn't happy about something." Lady Ludroth wasn't interested in a lopsided painting of an unhappy deceased husband. Isabel thought it unnerving, eerie. A freezing cold breeze briefly surrounded her entire body and she shivered. Feeling as though something was watching her, Bertha propped the painting against the wall and straightened it. "Well, there's only one thing to do," said Lady Ludroth. "We'll have to go to Cairo and search for Nadja Nugan. There's a chance that he may still be alive." Isabel instantly thought of her mother and doubted if Lady Ludroth could convince her so easily this time that a trip to Cairo would improve her history studies. And even though Holly had gracefully accepted Lady Ludroth's idea to help out for a while, she did not want to take advantage of her friendship. "Don't you think we're being a bit hasty?" she asked. "We must strike while the iron's still hot, dear," said Lady Ludroth. "You and I will journey to Cairo. I'll get in touch with my old friend Flight Lieutenant Dan Denaire. We'll let Diana think you are busily holidaying in Scotland still, and I'll conjure up a passport for you. We won't stay long, I promise. No one will be any the wiser, and you'll be back home in no time at all." Isabel wasn't too keen on the sound of Mr. Dan Denaire, and had visions of an old wartime veteran with trembling hands and blurred vision. Surely they were not going to fly to Egypt in a rusty old aeroplane with a worm-eaten propeller. Up until now, Lady Ludroth had never put Isabel in any kind of danger, and so she decided to go ahead with the plan. As it was getting late, she went to bed. Her dream that night were of the sacred Egypt temples, powerful pharaohs and ancient pyramids, and of a frail boy distributing water to thirsty, sun-scorched men digging in the heat of the blistering desert sun. The morning light streamed through the slight parting of Isabel's curtains. She stirred restlessly, listening to a distant drone coming from outside the house. But this drone was not Bertha's motorbike. It was much louder and much deeper. At first she thought it was a low-flying aeroplane, but instead of fading into the distance, it surprisingly slowed down and sounded as though it had landed not too far away. Isabel sat up and rubbed her bleary eyes, suddenly realising what and who was responsible for the terrible noise. She eagerly sprang out of bed, dressed quickly, and hurried downstairs. Bertha was there, huffily opening the door to their visitor. There stood an elderly and rather dashing gentleman wearing a heavy leather flying jacket and a pilot's hat, looking as though he had just stepped out of a World War II movie. He smiled through his wing-shaped moustache. A top middle tooth was missing, and he had the cheekiest grin Isabel had ever seen. Dozens of medals were firmly pinned to his jacket and noisily clanked together whenever he moved. "Diddly-do," he said happily. "How are you, Bertha?" "Don't you diddly-do me," she replied sternly. "That rust bucket of yours has shredded my nice lawn yet again." He strolled past Bertha as though he had been hypnotised, heading straight towards Isabel. "Sugar and spice," he continued smoothly. "Glad to meet you. You seem rather nice." This must be Flight Lieutenant Dan Denaire, thought Isabel. "Diddly-do, pleased to meet you, Flight Lieutenant," she said. Dan gently took her hand and kissed it. His winged moustache felt soft and fluffy. "No need to be formal, young lady," he grinned. "Call me Dan." His hazel eyes sparkled. "Diddly-do, diddly-dee, chance of a cup of tea?" Bertha raised her eyebrows. "I wish you'd stop all that annoying diddly business. I cannot understand it," she said in an agitated voice. "My sister will be here in just a moment. Lucinda is beautifying herself as usual." "I see you haven't lost your wonderful charm, Bertha," grinned Dan, "and your adorable sense of humour." Isabel pursed her lips, fighting back laughter, and had a feeling that Bertha's flustered attitude was hiding a secret soft spot for the dashing airman. Dan stood like a statue, his arms folded behind his back, and waited patiently for Lady Ludroth. Bertha fetched her irritating guest his undeserved cup of tea. "Those are very fine medals," said Isabel, studying the colourful bronze and silver discs. There were so many medals that there was hardly a glimpse of leather to be seen. "You must have been very brave." "Got this one in Burma," he said, pointing to an engraved silver medal. "This is the Victoria Cross, and this was for my part at Dunkirk. Got rather messy, but our boys made us proud," he said, punching the air victoriously. "As always, I've always been an airman myself. Been shot down twice. Very unlucky, I'd say. But I was too cunning, just like a fox. Made my way home from France, helped by the French resistance, of course. Fantastic people. Endangered their own lives to help us Brits out. Won't be shot down again, though. Old Lucinda sent me a wicket." It stood to reason that Dan Denaire would not be shot down again by the Germans, as the Second World War had ended in 1945. But what had he meant by saying he had a wicket? "Sorry," apologised Isabel, "but what's a wicket?" "Haven't you met one?" he frowned. "Aviation wicket. Clever little chap, I'd say. Best crew a pilot could ever hope for on board his aeroplane. Trust him completely. Knows everything there is to know about flying an aircraft." Before Isabel could continue this interesting conversation, Lady Ludroth waltzed in like a breath of fresh air. "Ah, my old friend Dan Denaire. How lovely to see you again. I trust you had a good flight." "Diddly-do," he twiddled his moustache. "Lovely to see you, Lucinda." Dan gulped at her multicoloured caftan and the black sunglasses perched on top of her head. "Hubbly bubbly, you look rather lovely. Hit a spot of turbulence on the way here, I'm afraid. The wicket kept us on track, though. Handy little chap. Thanks a bunch." Isabel was still puzzled by the aviation wicket Dan had affectionately spoken of, and wanted answers. "Lady Ludroth, would you please tell me exactly what is an aviation wicket?" "Yes, of course. Aviation wickets are dwarf-like beings, highly experienced in the clever art of flying. Their one and only eye is extremely sharp, and their hearing is as sensitive as radar. They make fine companions, but only to experienced pilots such as Flight Lieutenant here." "Diddly-do, that's very true," said Dan, smiling through his gapped teeth. "Their only drawback is the amount of snails they eat during each trip. It's a bit whiffy. Makes one's stomach feel awfully nauseous, especially during a long haul." Isabel grimaced. "Snails? That's pretty disgusting." I know, dear, said Lady Ludroth, but snails are an essential part of a Wiggit's diet. Without them he would die, poor creature. The thought of flying 4 hours with a smelly, snail-eating Wiggit all the way to Egypt suddenly lost its charm for Isabel. Dan's eyes twinkled when Bertha suddenly appeared. Tea, everyone? Perhaps you'd like to try one of my homemade shortcake biscuits, Flight Lieutenant, she asked. Diddly do, don't mind if I do. He bit into the friendly baked golden biscuit. It crumbled, sticking to his moustache and then falling as he chewed onto his medalled chest. Sugar and spice taste rather nice, he said. I must say, I'm surprised that contraption you've landed on my lawn manages to stay in the air at all. Are you sure to get these two safely to Egypt in one piece? Asked Bertha. You know what people say, Bertha, old girl. They don't build machinery like that, like they used to. Take your cracking motorbike, for instance, solid as a rock and will probably outlast all of us in this room today. I say, do they still call you Biker, Bertha? Yes, that was my delightful sister's nickname for me, she said, nodding towards Lady Ludroth. Makes me sound like a Hell's Angel, if you ask me. Well, you've always been a bit of a rebel, said Dan approvingly. I admire a woman with lots of spirit and a mind of her own. Bertha blushed, embarrassed. I'd expect you'll all be off soon, she said, quickly changing the subject. Isabel did not like flying at the best of times, and that's most unusual for a white witch. She had had holidays abroad, but during the plane's takeoff she'd squeezed her father's hand so tightly that he yelped. Her ears had popped and she had had to suck boiled sweets to stop her from feeling as though her head had been ducked underwater. Lady Ludroth and Isabel said their goodbyes. Dan smoothly pecked Bertha's quivering hand. She quickly withdrew it, complaining that he was a charming rogue. If she had taken the time to investigate the trench marks that Dan had carved into her lawn, she would have given the charming rogue an angry piece of her mind. The Second World War bomber's propeller whizzed round, expelling a strong gust of wind and causing Lady Ludroth to hold on to her sunglasses, afraid they would be swept into the air. Isabel battled against a forceful current and headed towards the plane. Surprisingly, the bomber looked in remarkable condition for its age. Dan obviously loved and cherished his ancient machine and regular mode of transportation. Scattered here and there, however, were a number of dents that looked like bullet holes. Below the cockpit was a painting of a buxom beauty poised in an undignified position, and next to her were rows of aeroplane drawings that had been simultaneously struck through with a thick black line. No doubt, thought Isabel, planes that Dan had shot out of the sky during the war. Are these all the planes that you shot down? She asked, counting the lines. Missed every one, replied Dan disappointedly. Spitfires, too damn crafty for my old girl. Isabel had a puzzled expression on her face. Instead of keeping a record of the planes he had hit, Dan had marked the ones he had missed. And that beauty's my lucky mascot, Gladys, I call her. Now, you'd better jump on board, young lady. At that moment, a side panel smoothly opened and a short flight of steps descended to the ground below. Through the opening appeared a squat figure, its one lidless eye blinking and twitching. This was the aviation Wiggit, and he smelt of fish. Suddenly he made a strange gurgling sound like a happy baby. He gets very excited when we have passengers, said Dan, especially when we have beautiful ladies like yourselves. The Wiggit gurgled, waving his fingers and encouraging Isabel to walk up the stairs. Will he be okay with me? Asked Isabel apprehensively, ascending the steps, closely followed by Lady Ludroth. Don't worry, dear, said Lady Ludroth reassuringly. Wiggits are harmless creatures. Isabel sighed with relief. Except when they run out of their personal supply of snails. Then they have been known to rip people's heads off. That's reassuring, thought Isabel, nervously nodding and smiling at the unusual cabin crew, quietly praying that Dan had stocked plenty of slimy snails for him to eat. She would rather suffer the unpleasant stench than have the Wiggit bite her head off. To Isabel's astonishment, the interior of the old bomber had been completely transformed into something that looked like a futuristic spacecraft. Panels of oddly shaped coloured lights flashed on and off. There was plenty of room with comfortable plush chairs and sofas and a flat screen television sunk into the wall. Isabel was flabbergasted and had expected a compact rusty bean can distastefully furnished with moth-eaten, threadbare seating. Definitely not a stylish, luxurious apartment. "Great reception on that television," said Dan. "Hundreds of channels to watch, including shows from other planets. And judging by the look on your pretty face, it isn't quite what you expected." "No, not at all," said Isabel. "I'm pleasantly surprised, Flight Lieutenant. I think I'll enjoy flying to Egypt after all." "How many hours will it take us?" asked Isabel, kicking off her shoes, feeling relaxed and happy, and looking forward to chilling out in a high-tech environment. "Now, let's see," he said, thoughtfully twiddling his moustache. "It'll be a long haul, this one. I'd say it'll take us 15 minutes at least."